In round one of the Altibox Norway Chess Blitz tournament, it seems only appropriate that the two pre-tournament favorites would be facing off. And as you can see, Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura are already going at it. Magnus employs a Verisov opening, which is a personal favorite of mine, and the weird twisty noise in the background makes me wonder if the audio was already given a Sean Paul remix before I even got a chance to look at this game. After a6, e3, and bishop f5, we have a pretty standard approach by Nakamura to face the Verisov. The bishop here fully intends to meet the light squared bishop on d3 for a trade, preventing white from getting what would normally be potentially very good attacking chances over here. And after bishop to d3, the trade happens, but Magnus gets something in return for that, which is that when he captures with the c-pawn, the normal dysfunction of having the knight in front of the pawn is gone. Though white now has doubled pawns, the main point is that these double pawns are actually not the most useless things on the board. Controlling squares, as we can see, very, very useful for white as he develops into the center. Hikaru plays bishop to d6 and is offering a trade right back at Magnus, and he says, no thank you, I'd like to keep my bishop and I will pin your knight, maybe getting some attacking chances anyway, despite the absence of my light square bishop. Natural development continues, castles, h6 quickly by Nakamura. The bishop retreats to maintain the pin, and Korotki Rekarovka. Now, one thing to look at as Magnus plays e4 here is that the tension between these two pawns is going to be a critical aspect of the ensuing middle game. Hikaru plays bishop e7 since the immediate threat was obvious to fork the bishop and the knight, and this bishop is also useful to unpin the knight on f6. But I'm coming back to the tension here in the center, talking about the tension between these two pawns and then what it means for these double pawns right behind them. The main thing is that when you have tension like that in the center, neither side wants to break it. Obviously, if black captures on e4, white is never unhappy with two dominant center pawns, now completely healthy, and Aaron Nimzovich is clapping in his grave. But the issue is that, okay, obviously white wants black to capture, but black's not going to do it. Hikaru plays knight to b6 naturally. He has the same intentions to just build on this tension, because by the same right, if white ever captured here, black would capture back, and now these double pawns have been revealed for the absolutely horrific weaknesses that they are. So the tension there that exists in the center with this is one of the reasons we're going to see all this remaneuvering. Magnus plays the move rook a to c1, Hikaru plays c6, and again, the tension has built, the play has been set, and as any cheesy Hollywood director would say, and scene. Magnus plays rook to e1. Again, all the pieces are going to do their best to maneuver and find useful squares, not just for the current position, but assuming the tension will eventually break. You see rooks coming to potentially open files if a trade happened. This rook already did the same if a trade happened. But with both sides positionally aware of what they don't want to do, Hikaru not wanting to capture and give Magnus a big center, and Magnus not wanting to capture to weaken his, or at least reveal his weak double pawns, we continue to see remaneuvering moves. h3 is useful. Hikaru wants to offer a trade. Usually when you have less space, trades help. Magnus almost touches the piece on e7, as you can see there. He almost made that trade, and Stockfish actually initially likes the trade, but then backs up and actually kind of likes Magnus's move. Having reviewed this game in pretty deep detail for all of you to try to offer whatever educational nuggets I can in a very fast blitz game, I can say that these two both played a very, very high-level game with only a couple critical moments where maybe one side could have done something different. So, Hikaru plays rook to e8. That's just a useful move, again, staring the rook down, saying, I'm ready for the tension to break just as you are. It also opens up this f8 square for either one of these pieces. Magnus plays a3. Hikaru plays bishop f8. As I said, the square was open. And Magnus's goal continues to be, how can I improve on my position? How can I create space without breaking the tension here? He finds a very high-level plan, a la Magnus Carlsen style, one that the computer loves too, queen a2. Playing more like an engine than anybody else in his generation, of course, is Magnus Carlsen. Queen a2 prepares the idea of b4, and certainly if these squares come under control and white is able to continue to advance on this side of the board, white's just going to gain space and have freedom. Here comes b4, And Hikaru is now in a tough position where it's not to say he's clearly worse here, but it's obvious that black is defending. He's kind of maneuvering, kind of waiting for white to figure out the plan. Plays knight h5, playing a little tickle with the bishop, and says, I'll just back that thing up, and ask Magnus again, I know you're better here, but how much better? What's your plan going to be? You still don't want to take. Obviously, pushing also leaves these pawns behind. Maybe they're not as weak as they would be on an open file, but not ideal. So Magnus recognizes that, again, still putting the rook on d1, still kind of preparing for danger to happen. Queen e7 is played. You could argue that maybe this position is one of the few moments where Hikaru had something better to play with the move a5, possibly getting that rook and bishop involved. But I'm not really even sure that's true. He plays queen e7, and then the move knight to d2 comes from Magnus with pretty clear ideas. He wants to bring the knight to b3. Will he pop into a5? Will he pop into c5? Maybe it just depends on his favorite color that day. Is it blue or green? And either way, Magnus, in all seriousness, is going to be trying to continue to gain space on the queen side and build on the tension. Hikaru quickly brings the rook to c8. Magnus continues his plan, and Hikaru retreats the knight once again, trying to keep his eye on this square, and still defending a slightly worse position, knowing that he doesn't want to break the tension, but asking Magnus exactly what he wants to do. Plays queen to d8, and here we go. The fireworks will start happening as soon as trades start being offered. Hikaru quickly put the rook on e7, which I think was the right idea, not to trade right away. Obviously, if he had traded, by the way, in the end of these lines, white is probably gobbling that pawn. So to stay with him in the live position, we do see the trade now. Magnus takes it with the d-pawn. I spent some time looking into b takes with the engine. It's possible that the b file could have been an asset for white. He obviously decided against it and decides to open up the position, heading for this plan with d4. And Hikaru immediately plays b6, knowing he doesn't just want to sit on a lack of space. This is a position where I do think there was a cool idea to talk about. Magnus does not play this move, but a5 with a sacrifice of the pawn and then a quick grabbing of the b file was an interesting idea for white to consider, especially because that bishop is so dominant. It means that black could never really have come back and challenged the b file. Magnus didn't do it, and I'm going to stay with the live position because b5 was played. We had a whole bunch of trades that undermined the center, and he ends up winning the d5 pawn, eventually heading toward an endgame that we're going to see, where Magnus was still the only one who could win, sort of playing for two results. But I think he kind of relied on the open tactical nature of this position, revealing something or giving something more to white than he got, because it seems weird, right? Hikaru's rook is on g6, it's on a7. This bishop is really nicely placed. We got a sexy knight on d5, and with that should come a whole bunch of tactical possibilities. But in the end, there weren't the concrete possibilities that delivered a serious material advantage. So I'm wondering if those who want to back up the video and look at that a5 suggestion by me, maybe that was another interesting thing for Magnus to do to keep a sort of a grinding edge, more Magnus style. Now, after queen to b7, he is still better, so don't get me wrong, and Hikaru has to find critical moves. Rook a2 is a very nice move, trying to make sure his rooks have the potential to meet for a date on g2 if Magnus blunders. Magnus plays bishop to c7. The engines do initially suggest moves like queen to g5 or queen a4, but neither really does anything. The bishop can back up, and probably black gets in trouble. He plays queen a8, which allows the forcing combination you see before you. Magnus goes for this pretty aggressively because once you maneuver to the 7th rank and that knight has to move, Bob's your uncle. He wins the pawn on c5, and we're looking at a position where, again, Magnus is clearly in the driver's seat with this extra c-pawn. What's amazing here is how Hikaru really keeps his head. There's a lot of ways to try to defend this drawn ending, but he finds the absolute best move, rook to c6. Because if he's going to trade into the rook ending, as Magnus does, he actually is much better served if his rook is already in this position in front of the c-pawn. And so now as both sides sort of try to run their pieces out, white trying to bring in his king, black bringing up his king aggressively to d6, it becomes clear, I think, pretty quickly that Magnus is going to lose that c-pawn, so Hikaru just has to make sure he doesn't lose any pawns on the king side in the meantime. The moves continue to maneuver around. Magnus realizes he doesn't want to repeat and take a draw now, so he'll bring up the king and take the risk that the king and pawn ending might be a draw. Hikaru obviously has to play a5 first to keep this king out of the king and pawn ending, but once h4 is played, Hikaru calculates as fast as anybody on the planet and correctly decides he can risk this king and pawn ending. His king will get back in time, and he is going to have the chance to draw this ending. Very dangerous and scary to go for an endgame like this when your king is so much farther than the opponent's, but as we're going to see, he calculated it very quickly and accurately, as Nakamura does often. This trade only means that both sides are going to get their ladies back on the board at the same time, and the player's body language is already revealing to us that both of them know this is simply a draw. Hikaru finds the fastest way to get these queens off the board, and we love these two professionals playing it out to their only kings remaining. Before we end this game and our live video coverage, courtesy of Peter Dockers, who was on site in Norway, ends, I want to come back to the only other critical moment where Magnus maybe had winning chances was right here, according to the analysis I did with the engine. Probably in hindsight, once he realized he wasn't getting the best winning chances in this rook ending, any bishop move would have been better. Bishop to d6 maintains better winning chances. Bishop to e5 maintains better winning chances. And even bishop to g3. All of these moves remain in a position where black does have to figure out how to guard this knight. Now, with decent drawing chances, black is not out of it yet, but I would bet that if he had it to over again, Magnus would consider this a much better fight for a win. The engines agree. Black lacks ideal coordination to stay in front of the pawn. So, with that, we bring our analysis of round 1 of the Altibox Norway Chess Super Blitz tournament. Again, faced off the two pre-tournament favorites. Thanks for checking this out. Please subscribe to our channel here on YouTube and look for my next video coming out this week where we review the next, not necessarily the next round, but the next game we had of Magnus Carlsen playing at the Norway Chess Super Tournament.